Love is defined as a intense feeling of deep affection. That is the textbook definition of love. As attachment is defined as, I'm reading this from my laptop, an extra part or extension that is or may be attached to something to perform a particular function. And like when you hear that definition, right, it's just like, it doesn't sound like it applies to like the type of attachment that we're talking about. Because, for instance, you know how like when you have definitions on Google, it has like the little, like, I guess, example of it in a sentence. The sentence underneath is, the processor comes complete with a blender attachment. So it's quite literally just talking about like physical things and practical blenders and whatever, right? So it doesn't sound like it applies to our relationships when we're talking about attachment in that sense. But sweetheart, it fucking does. Listen to this. If attachment is an extension that performs a function, then the question becomes, what function is this person serving in your life? Because I think in relationships, attachment often functions as validation, comfort, fear of loneliness, familiarity, sexual intimacy, routine, emotional security, an ego boost. It can function as a lot of things. So, in relationships, sometimes we are not attached to the people, but we are attached to the function that they serve. Hello everyone, my name is Emerson and welcome to Mental Banter. Today I'm going to be talking about love versus attachment and being able to understand the two of them and differentiate them, so you are less confused, I guess, in your relationships. So let's get on into it. So I think, growing older and dating, being in relationships and navigating all those, all that stuff in our lives, I think, we've all done a little bit of dance and attachment, I think. Maybe not everyone, but like I can confidently say that, in conversations that I've had with other people, it's a very common theme within a lot of our lives that we've all kind of been attached to somebody or something, not even just in our romantic relationships, but like platonic as well. Attachment is a very common thing, I think, amongst us all. And I think if we're not careful, when we don't educate ourselves on it, or if we don't really understand the difference between it, it can end up like leading us, into relationships that don't fully serve us in our older years. And I think it's really important to, I guess, just understand the difference. I think the key difference between love and attachment pretty much is just that, like, love is very calm. Love doesn't make your nervous system do a backflip every single time the person messages you. And that's the thing. Growing up, we've been kind of programmed into like the butterflies that we feel is meant to be like love, whereas I actually think butterflies is a really strong indication of anxiety, or like that spark that we get. We're told to think that that's what love is meant to feel like. And of course, those butterflies can feel really exciting, but most of the time it is quite literally just our nervous system re-regulating itself every single time we get an ounce of attention from this person. And I know I sound like the biggest like negative Nancy for this, but it's true. Sometimes butterflies aren't always a good indication that that it's a healthy relationship. I think love has a lot more to do with the other person. So when you love somebody, you love them for their qualities and then the person they are. Whereas I feel like attachment is so much more to do with us and our own fears. I think it's to do with how that person makes us feel about ourselves. And I think we really tie our worth to how that person makes us feel. And we mistake like that excitement that our nervous system has for like an indication of love. Like we think, oh, like my body is super excited when this person talks to me. It's a sign of, me loving them. And I'm not going to dismiss that. Like, I think, when you love someone, obviously you're excited to talk to them and stuff. But I think your body really knows the difference. You can be excited for someone, but not completely like lose yourself. Whereas I think with attachment, your nervous system, is excited, but you tend to lose yourself within that excitement, if that makes sense. But the thing is, when somebody is good for you, or if it's, a healthy attachment, or if it's, a healthier relationship, your body isn't supposed to be thrown out of whack every single time that you talk to this person or that you interact with this person. I'm a firm believer in your body knows before your mind knows, because it's a feeling. The amount of times that I've met someone or, gone out with somebody or whatever, and afterwards I've done like a check-in with my body, and if I feel drained, feel funky, I trust that, because I'm like, all right, we're not meeting each other there, you know what I mean? But I think people, mistake it being calm for being boring, because it doesn't have to be boring. Chemistry is also very important as well, I think, in relationships. And relationships aren't always, 90% healthy all of the time. Like, it's very normal to have hiccups, to have slight ounces of, attachment for people and stuff. I just think it only becomes a really big issue when it actually just, replaces genuine, attraction and safety, and it doesn't affect your self-esteem, Some, I guess, key distinctions between love and attachment. I have a little table written down here, actually. So for love is freedom. It's calm. It's this person is an addition to your life. It makes you better in a sense. It's very selfless. It's literally just to do with the other person, like having love for that person. It's about giving. It's unselfish care. It's safety. It's a lot of trust, and it focuses, on the happiness of the other person in a sense. And it is very secure. Whereas attachment is rooted in fear. It's different for everybody, but sometimes, it's fear of change. It's a fear of losing familiarity, fear of being lonely, a fear of making the wrong decision. There's so much fear rooted in attachment. Also, with attachment, it can be toxic. It can be a bit of tit for tat, and it can be very messy and can feel addictive. Someone shouldn't be a drug for you. And the thing is, I know that feeling of excitement when someone feels like that for you, and their attention feels amazing. But I think that has a lot more to do with yourself and how you feel about yourself versus them. Also with attachment, it tends to fill a void, or it keeps you in the one spot, whereas love, it makes you better. I think attachment keeps you at a steady pace. Sometimes even just for comfort, like your comfort zone. Sometimes when we build our life around people, it becomes comfortable and we're afraid to leave that. It's codependency as well. And I also think with attachment, it's very, it can be very selfish, because it's based around, my needs and how I feel. Whereas I think love is about the other person. It can be restrictive, and it's very anxiety driven, and it's an insecure relationship most of the time. Some of that stuff is really hard to hear, because, I've definitely been in denial about being attached to people when I thought I was just in love with them. It's very hard to look at your situation and be able to face whether it's actually love or it's attachment. And I can say, I think also there can be a bit of both. I'm not going to disregard that. Like, I think you can love someone, but also be attached to them. I think it just depends on whether the attachment is outweighing the love. When I kind of first started, I guess, learning a bit about love versus attachment, and, I guess just having healthier standards for myself in dating, in relationships and friendships, I initially kind of viewed it as boring, because as much as I pride myself on, I feel like, I guess now having, healthier standards for myself and, healthier views on relationships, there is a part of me that, that has always kind of been there, that likes that thrill, that kind of likes my nervous system doing a backflip here and there, that likes the chase, that, likes the unknown. Because as much as it's anxiety driven, there's also that peak of excitement, and I notice that in myself and in a lot of other people. I've had so many conversations about this with other people, so when I initially kind of started, learning a bit about, love and attachment and the difference, I kind of looked at it and was like, oh, well, that just kind of sounds boring. And I know it's a shit thing for me to say, but initially when I looked at it, I was like, oh, well, what's the fun in that? Well, I don't have someone that I have to prove my worth to, or there's no chase. I just have them. What's the fun in that? As much as that that version of myself, I'm not afraid to say it still lives within me. I also feel like as I've grown and learnt more about it and applied it in my own dating and my own relationships, I've learnt that healthy doesn't automatically equal boring. And this is where I tie in chemistry with it as well. For me, I love chemistry. I think we all love chemistry. We all thrive off chemistry, and we find people that we have extreme chemistry with. And I think it's important to have chemistry, but as long as chemistry isn't the only thing that's thriving in the relationship. What I mean by that is it doesn't have to be boring if you have chemistry, because chemistry isn't boring. It just needs to be more than chemistry. You cannot sustain a relationship purely based off chemistry. There has to be compatibility, communication, all that other stuff that comes along with having a healthy relationship. Chemistry isn't just enough to sustain a healthy relationship, because chemistry is, for me, it feels it's very like in your face. It's very, very intense. And that's not enough to sustain a relationship. So I guess what I'm saying is love doesn't have to be boring, because chemistry's there. But as long as you're not just purely thriving off of chemistry and there's other things coming into it, like commitment, communication, all that stuff, all the practical things that make a relationship work. Because I think when you're purely just thriving off of chemistry with somebody, that's where attachment can come on in, because, you're attached to this feeling, this intensity, this validation. But if this person isn't meeting, your actual, practical needs, emotional and practical and physical needs and wants in relationships, well, then it's not going to serve you in the long run. So yeah, if I've learned anything, it doesn't mean that, building, healthier relationships and stuff means it has to be boring. Love can still be so exciting and so beautiful and so intense and so thrilling and chemistry driven. But as long as that's not the only driving force behind it. And this is where I'm going to be tying it in with situationships. The big conversation about situationships. Situationships, I'm reading as a definition, is an undefined, non-committed, romantic or sexual relationship lacking clear labels, often characterized by ambiguity, convenience, and inconsistency. If I had $1, I think for every single situationship that I've heard about, I think I would be a millionaire. I think especially in modern dating, situationships have become something huge. And you know what? I'm not a big fan of them. I don't love them. I've done my dance in situationships, and I can confidently say I think this is where, attachment kind of plays a massive role in situationships. I saw this TikTok, I think like a year or so ago, and I tried to find it the other day, but I cannot find it. But this woman, she really explained situationships really well. There's so many videos, and education on, I guess, situationships and stuff and how to survive them and stuff. But this lady, I think, just really hit it on the head, but I cannot find the fucking TikTok. So this is credits to her because she explained this so well. I don't know her name. Anyways, situationships usually happen when one person lacks integrity and the other lacks self-esteem, or either. Like, you can lack integrity and self-esteem. That is the remedy for a situationship, I think 90% of the time. Situationships, I think they're all a bit different in some ways, and there's all, different stories and different people and different characters and stuff. But at the end of the day, I think it just literally just comes down to one person wanting more and the other person not wanting more, but reaping off of the benefits most of the time. And it's about just not meeting each other's needs and wants, but staying because we either reap the benefits, or we're staying because we're afraid to leave, or we're staying because we want to convince them otherwise. I've played, both roles in situationships, and I'm not proud of it, but, I've played the role of being the person who lacked integrity. Like, when I was younger, I've done that, and I'm not proud of it. And I've also played the role of being the person who has lacked self-esteem. I've been on both ends of the stick. Like, lacking integrity is like when someone knows what the other person wants, or they can tell that person likes them, and they know that they don't want the same thing, but they continue benefiting from the connection anyway. Whereas the person with low self-esteem, they know they want more. They might not voice it. That's also the catch. Like, sometimes, we say we want casual when deep down we know we don't. And it's also on us to communicate it. But despite that, being the person with low self-esteem, it usually just means that, we know we want more, and we know that person isn't really going to give that to us, but we stay anyways because we either fear losing the connection or we try to convince them otherwise. And in this video, this woman had a really great, example for it. And she talked about it in a sense of drunk driving. This example really helps me understand, the integrity that comes along with being in a situationship, and that it's not always entirely your fault for ending up in a situationship as well, because it takes two to tango. So, for the example, imagine one person is drunk and they want to drive home. They're clearly intoxicated and they want to drive. There's another person who is sober. In this scenario, the drunk person is the one with low self-esteem, and the sober person is the one that lacks integrity. So, technically, the drunk person is responsible for themselves. They're the one choosing to drive. They're their responsibility. But if the sober person has integrity, they're not just going to stand there and let this person who is clearly intoxicated get behind the wheel. They'd take the keys and call a taxi or figure out some other way for that person to get to wherever they wanted to. They would initially stop them because they know that person is putting themselves in danger. And I think this example is a really good example of situationships, because that person who has low self-esteem, they are responsible for themselves, that is their responsibility. But as a person who has just general integrity, you're not going to see someone who's clearly putting themselves in danger and let them do it. You're going to stop it, and you're going to take responsibility and stop them from hurting themselves. So when you're in a situationship and say the other person, whichever role you play, but one person is letting you drink drive, then that's not them having integrity, because they know that you're putting yourself at risk of danger, regardless of whether it's their responsibility to look after you or not, because it's not, but it's about just having general integrity. So when you're in a situationship and you know that this person clearly wants more than you, it is your responsibility to pull away. It's up to the other person to voice it, because then again, I said, sometimes we might not always voice it just to keep something in our lives, and we'll lie to ourselves and say that we're happy with casual when we're not. So yes, that is our responsibility, but it's also important to just read basic signs and just to take responsibility for your part in it. So a person with integrity would either step up and pull away to avoid leading them on, or if they lacked integrity, they would keep taking the benefits, attention, the sex, the companionship, even though they know they can't give the person what they want. And then on the other end of the stick, it does come along with responsibility. Don't let someone tell you more than once that they don't want to be with you. Don't. Because it's a shit feeling. If you know that someone is not wanting what you want out of something or willing to commit, staying in that situation, it can come from a place of lacking worth and self-esteem because you're accepting less than what you actually want. So this is where I think, attachment kind of comes into play, because on the two ends of the stick, the one person, who lacks integrity, they might be attached to this person because, they give them a sense of validation, closeness, emotional intimacy that they might not feel like they're ready for or ready to commit for, but they still reap the benefits. And it's probably, not pushing them to be better, but they're just staying put in this one place because it feels good and they're reaping benefits. It can lead it being selfish and toxic. And then on the other hand, if you are the person who wants more but isn't communicating that or is staying regardless, there's attachment there because we feel like if we can convince that person to want to date us, then maybe that will validate us. Or if we leave it, we're afraid of what's going to happen. There's so many things that can tie us to be attached to other people. And I think that's where, situationships usually stem from. It's because it's this messy, inconsistent, unlabeled thing that makes our nervous system kind of go crazy and it feels exciting. But at the end of the day, love isn't supposed to feel like that. I think love is supposed to feel very calm and regulated and not perfect, but steady and stable to an extent. And I think just at the end of the day, when it comes to situationships, or maybe even in relationships as well, situationships, relationships, even friendships, looking at it and thinking, is this person meeting my needs and wants? Just bottom line, is this person planning to, or will they, or are they, or have they? Are they meeting my needs and wants? And the answer can be no, and we can still hesitate to end things. But when that happens, it's usually a good indication that we are attached. And that can be a bit of a shocking epiphany to some of us. It's a hard reality to face because it really shocks our idea of love all over the place. Maybe, I don't know what we've been through or what everyone's been through to lead them to believe that this is what love looks like. But once you unlearn that that's not actually love, you can begin to learn what love actually looks like for you and in your relationships. And I think that's just, one step closer to having better relationships that actually meet your needs and wants and the other person's needs and wants. And yeah. Anyhow, that was it for today. I hope that was enjoyable and made sense. I do want to talk a lot more about, attachment styles and, sex and relationships. So that was just kind of scratching the surface a little bit. Look after yourselves. Stay out of situationships. I love you. Bye-bye.